Hello everyone. I would like to welcome our in-person audience and virtual audience to track 4, Translating Data into Actionable Insights. I'm Lakshmi Randall from Informatica, track producer and moderator for this session. Our session this hour is how a top 10 life sciences company delivered value in months with a modern data platform. In this session, Modak will share how a top life sciences company accelerated time to value with a next generation data platform by leveraging architectures like data lakes, data fabric, and data mesh. Our speaker for this hour is Mayank Mehra. Mayank leads product team at Modak. Welcome, Mayank. The floor is yours. Take it away.
Thank you, Lakshmi. Thank you for the introduction, and thanks everyone for joining in today. We're going to talk about a real case study of how a top pharma company used some of the approaches and solutions to build out a modern data platform in an accelerated manner. While the examples and challenges and the solution approach we talk about is for the pharma industry, some of these will also resonate with data and analytics teams in other enterprises as well. And with that, I'll start with a brief introduction about the business context in which this solution was conceptualized and implemented. I'll talk about some of the opportunities we saw. I'll talk about some of the takeaways, the outcomes, and towards the end, we'll get a little deeper into these details of the product that was implemented. Just a quick introduction. My name is Mayank. I lead the products team at Modak. Modak is a focused provider of data engineering solutions and services. With me is Rajesh. Rajesh will talk about the recommended approach for implementation of modern data platforms. From a delivery standpoint, Rajesh is a technical program manager. To start with, I want to start with stating the obvious. Data has been recognized as a strategic asset. There's a McKinsey study which quotes that companies which treat data as a strategic asset are 23 times more likely to acquire customers, 19 times more likely to retain, to be profitable, and 6 times more likely to retain customers. And these are things that are accepted across industries. But what is not so obvious is that 90% of enterprise data platforms are predicted to fail by Gartner. And this is a staggering statistic, that with data being seen as a strategic asset, we still foresee that a lot of data efforts will go in vain. And similarly, as of now, 80% of customers do not have an inventory of their data assets. So just to be able to discover the data that they have, that itself remains a big challenge. While these are generic problems across industries, I want to start by giving a context of life sciences and specifically the drug discovery process in life sciences, because that presents some more level of complexity. Drug discovery process is a high risk reward process. Typical drug discovery takes anywhere up to 10 years for a candidate drug to reach market launch. It's resource intensive. Anywhere around $2 billion of investment is required for a molecule to be released as a drug. And it's high risk because the success rate is on an average about 10%. Now, given that this is a high risk reward, resource intensive process, typically pharma companies invest close to 12 to 15% of their revenues in R&D. And therefore, any improvement in this entire process directly impacts some of the key business parameters for the enterprise. I'll give a brief background about the customer that we are talking about here. It's a large corporation, multi-billion-dollar life sciences company with operations across the world, manufacturing operations in 10 different countries, and thousands of researchers and scientists who are involved in drug discovery process. Now, given that there is likely to be complexity in the data landscape, and this is something that would be true for any large enterprise. Now, given that the data landscape is expected to be complex, there were some opportunities that were identified initially. First is to find data across internal and external sources. For pharma companies, external data is increasingly important. Even for other industries, external data is becoming increasingly important in their overall data mix. And the challenge with external data is that the standards cannot be controlled because this is coming from another organization. And therefore, aligning and harmonizing the data between internal and external sources becomes an important attribute for any data management strategy. Aligning and standardizing across data domains at a scale of terabytes across thousands of data sets is again a long drawn process. And this has to be something that has to be institutionalized so that it can be repeated and something that can be scaled up for multiple data sets. Now, given that aligning internal and external data and a variety of data is such a time-taking process, it is imperative that organizations promote reuse and sharing of data, because a lot of investment is already made into creating those data assets, and therefore, instead of reinventing the wheel, enterprises can promote reuse of existing data assets. Given that the end users who will be accessing data assets typically look at data as it exists, and sometimes this data exists in schema which is defined by the IT and may not be very easily understood or intuitively understood by end users. And therefore, it becomes important to translate these IT-driven schemas into a business context so that end users are not looking at just column names or table names, but when they look at data, they understand what it means. There are already existing investments that are made in on-prem and legacy data investments and tools. And any approach to building out a modern data platform must also leverage the existing investments. And therefore, the opportunity is there to build on top of what exists, interoperate with existing investments, and build out a modern data platform that can cater to use cases as they evolve. For pharma companies specifically, it's important to be able to leverage time and resources that have been used in analyzing past clinical data to discover and uncover opportunities for new drug development. Now, with this kind of a background, to lay out the complexity of the data landscape, the fact that data is spread across multiple different silos, and these silos are according to different dimensions. There is a type of data. Data could be structured, unstructured, semi-structured. There is data on-prem, on cloud. There is internal data, external data. And given that this data runs into terabytes and hundreds and thousands of tables, it becomes important to build out a solution which automates the entire process of translating raw data into curated data products, as well as scalable to meet any further future requirements as they come along. And to do that, the solution that was used was a combination of Modak, Naboo, and Cloudera. Cloudera CDP product was selected because it's scalable. Modak Naboo is a platform that orchestrates and automates a lot of activities around creating a data platform. So using a metadata-driven approach, Modak Naboo enables creation and orchestration of ingestion and transformation pipelines. Now, with this approach, what we were able to see is that data from about 72,000 different data sets was ingested into a data platform. And once the core capability existed for the data platform, the data could then be curated into data products that were then utilized by end consumers. These consumers could be data scientists. These consumers could also be data science, citizen data scientists, could be Cloudera machine learning, where some of the attributes that were discovered were provided as input. So if you look at it from a point of view of logically segregating the different parts of the solution, what we see is that the core capability around building out a data fabric which is really the part about building a virtual layer that connects various data sources, has core capabilities around a metadata catalog, data profiling, data search and exploration, and data ingestion and curation. Once those core capabilities were built out in the form of a data fabric, then this data could then be organized into domain-wise products. These products could then be consumed by data scientists, by researchers who are looking at accessing data for their drug discovery use cases. And this part about organizing the data into domain-oriented data products, this is analogous to a data mesh, where domain-oriented data products which are discoverable, addressable, understandable, these are then delivered to end users to use for their various use cases. So in that way, Naboo bridges that gap between a data fabric and a data mesh. The foundational capability starts with a data fabric, where getting all of the data from multiple different sources, building out a data platform, and then once that foundational capability exists, then that can be extended to building out data products into various domains and working closely with some of the business SMEs. The impact with this is that we talked about for life sciences companies, the time to value is an important metric, and by building out a data platform quickly, this solution demonstrated that data could be made available to end users for their various use cases, and therefore accelerates the entire process of using data in the process of drug discovery. We saw that the implementation time had gone down by about 75%. Typically, a data platform, in our experience, has taken somewhere around 12 months to build up from the ground. But using this approach inside of 12 weeks, we were able to stand up a data platform that could then be used for building out data products as per the use cases. The other capability is the acceleration in building out data products. So one is the part about acceleration of the foundational capability to build out a data platform. On top of that, the ability to build out data products as per the use cases. That's where we also see an acceleration of 4x, where inside of 1 month, working closely with the business, the data engineers are able to create data products in quick iterations and use that to refine it further before moving it into production. Some of the key outcomes that we saw, we talked about accelerating time to value. The R&D data lake was stood up inside of 12 weeks and therefore made available for use cases where data could be prepared, curated into end data products. The data fabric ingested about 70 plus terabytes of data from more than 200 sources and more than 70,000 tables. So the kind of acceleration that we saw in building out this data platform could be achieved only using an orchestrated approach with Modak Naboo. And this also, some of the other key metrics are the number of patient health records that got aggregated, number of the users who could possibly access a platform such as this with the data products. And it also enabled faster time to insights for various use cases, such as analyzing drug interactions, looking at adverse events, looking at genome associations, and so on. So in an approach which starts with discovering the data, ingesting that data, cataloging the data, profiling the data, and then curating that data for end use cases, that's where we see that using an automated approach, using Modak Naboo, this entire process could be accelerated by up to 75%. And to summarize, some of the key takeaways out of this entire exercise resulted in a data platform to standardize and democratize the data access. We followed an approach where data engineers and data scientists could work together in creating the data products so that there was quick iteration in building out those data products, quicker iterations in productionizing some of those data products. It reduced the time to value with a scalable technology platform, something that exists for use cases that might arise in the future with different varieties of data, with different sources of data. There was a strong executive alignment with respect to building out the solution. There was executive sponsorship in terms of looking at how the data should be delivered in domain-wise products, and which enabled the solution to be adopted to a wider audience. It improved the collaboration among researchers in building out these data products. So following an approach with a tool coming in that automates the process, that delivers data products in an iterative way, we see that there is a greater collaboration that exists between different stakeholders, and therefore accelerates the time to value for life sciences customers. And like we started by saying that a typical drug discovery process takes 10 years, the time to value becomes very important, and any impact that data tools are able to provide in that entire process directly impacts some of the key KPIs for the business. Those are some of the key takeaways. I will now talk about what is our recommended approach to building out a data platform. We took the example of a life sciences customer, but some of the learnings, some of the solutions that were implemented are equally applicable for other enterprises. We will talk a bit about first the delivery approach in terms of how to organize for building out data platforms, what has been our experience from a process perspective. And then I'll talk a bit more in detail about the tool that was used, which is Modak Naboo, and how it can enable in creation of modern data platforms in an accelerated way. So to talk about the process, I would invite Rajesh to cover the part about data engineering studios and how this approach accelerates the process of creation of modern data platforms.
Thank you, Mike. Hello, everyone. Myself, I'm Rajesh. I'm a technical program manager at Modak. Have been working with pharma, life sciences, and healthcare customers in building this modern data platform for them. So how we implement this is we try to use something called a data engineering studio. So this is nothing but a small cross-functional team members who actually have a skill set of data engineer, data ops, SRE, technical lead, subject matter experts, and database admin analytics. So we try to have these cross-functional teams to implement the modern data engineering studio. So what these team members do, they are self-organized to meet the business program goals, the use cases, and also the operational excellence. So why we have come up with this studio is to bridge the technical depth which comes in the analytics, the business domain knowledge, and data processing teams. This is through the agile delivery and automation to build the data domains. And we also achieved the continuous delivery and monitoring to support all the data pipelines and the data products for our customers. And finally, to institutionalize the data ops culture within the teams, and also the behaviors to productize the analytics and the data. Thank you.
Thanks, Rajesh. And to summarize, a data engineering studio is essentially a cross-functional team with experts from the business domain, data engineers, analysts, as well as platform maintenance group who can come together to quickly iterate on various use cases for building out data products, and then push these use cases into production using some of the best practices of agile delivery methodology. So that essentially is the idea in building out data engineering studio, and this is the part about the process of building out a modern data platform. Sometimes that gets a little less attention as compared to the technology and the tools. And this is an approach that we believe can significantly accelerate the process of standing up modern data platforms. So while this is the recommended approach, I will now talk in detail about the product, Modak Naboo, which actually enables creation of these data platforms and some of its key capabilities. The most common scenarios in creating data platforms start with orchestration of pipelines using a no-code approach. Now, why we talk about a no-code approach is that at a scale of thousands of pipelines running multiple times in a week or a month, it becomes essential that data engineers' time is utilized optimally. And therefore, for some of the standard tasks, the pipelines can be created using a no-code approach, freeing them up to take up more innovative tasks or to take up tasks that actually require their time. And this is what Modak Naboo enables, creation and orchestration of these pipelines using a no-code approach. How that works is with using that orchestration built out on a base of active metadata. So initially, any data source that we want to move data from is added into Naboo as a data connection. And what that means is that data spiders from Naboo can connect to these sources, get the technical metadata, and store it in a metadata repository. Now, this is required because this metadata forms the foundation of running the orchestration for the pipelines. And this metadata is used by a framework called bots, which orchestrates the pipelines for ingestion and transformation. In that way, the modern data platforms can be created using a bots framework, running Spark jobs, and these Spark jobs are created with Modak's Almarin framework. Almarin is also a homegrown framework in Naboo, in Modak, which is really a low-code approach for writing Spark jobs. And what that does is abstracts out some of the complexity of Spark and presents a simplified view for data engineers to be able to write Spark jobs. So with Almarin being the foundation, bots orchestrate these Spark jobs, and in that way the pipelines can get created from the sources to the modern data platforms. These are some of the examples of how the pipeline gets created. It's a complete, like I said, no-code approach. So what we see is that in 80% of the cases, there are straight moves from the source to the destination, but sometimes there are corner cases that need to get handled in terms of perhaps number of source connections to a data set, or in terms of how to handle schema drift, or how to chain workflows, or look at data type mappings. These are all examples that are real examples that we encounter and data engineers encounter in the process of creating those pipelines. And some of these take up a lot of time. And what Modak Naboo does is abstract out that complexity, presents an interface with a lot of different options available for the data engineers to look at which data sets to pull, how to pull them, how to load that into the destination, how to handle schema drift, how to do incremental load, change data capture, and all of those things which are offered to the end user using a low-code approach, using a user interface. And this is what accelerates the process of creation of data platforms. Another part that takes up a lot of time for data engineers is the part about monitoring the pipelines, troubleshooting any kind of errors. Typically, that requires looking at what's gone wrong, looking at logs, looking at different points to triage a possible reason or root cause. And Naboo offers a unified monitoring dashboard, which allows data engineers to look at the status of a pipeline, look at how long it has been running, look at the status of the last 5 runs, look at even the status of individual objects flowing through the pipeline. So very granular approach to be able to monitor these pipelines. And then all the information that is required for data engineers to be able to troubleshoot any kind of errors. So the logs are presented, possible error reasons are presented, and users can use that to find the root cause for pipeline failure. And with this approach, this is what we feel, this is what we have seen accelerates the implementation time by 75%. And typically for a modern data platform which has sources from which sources data from hundreds of sources, thousands of data sets, the time has come down from months to weeks. And that's the value of a no-code driven orchestration approach for creation of modern data platforms. The second scenario I'll talk about is around organizing data into various data domain products, because once the foundational capability of setting up the modern data platform exists by integrating data from various sources, this data needs to get curated and transformed for various end use cases. And this data must be organized according to data domains, which can then be accessible to end users based on the enterprise data governance policies. And how Naboo enables that is that within Naboo, data engineers can define logical groupings from multiple data sources. These are called data domains. These are the data domains would contain data sets from one or multiple physical data sources. And then for each data domain that gets created, the level of access can be defined. Now, typically in the example of a life sciences company, these domains could be, let's say, clinical, preclinical, real world evidence, genomics, and so on. For other enterprises, depending on the business context, data could be grouped into various business domains. And then the access on these domains is governed with a fine grain of control using some of the access management policies, where the governance is to the level where the users can look at just the metadata or can actually read the data, or even add their own metadata in the form of tags or in the form of descriptions and so on. So with the fine-grained access control policy and with data organized into various data domains, this becomes now accessible for end users to look at the data, to explore the data, to understand this data. While looking at the data, another important point is in terms of bringing in the business context for these data assets. Data in isolation cannot add as much value as data looked at within the business context. And that business context is provided by the data engineering teams, by the business teams in terms of information such as whether this is sensitive data, in terms of information whether this data can be used for a particular use case or not. And what Naboo enables is the propagation of this business context to multiple data assets in an automated way. So using a machine learning based tagging methodology, any tags that get applied to a data set can get propagated to others in an automated fashion. These data domains also allow users to be able to profile the data. This gives important information regarding the quality of the data sets, and that enables users to assess and evaluate how this data can be used for their various use cases. So in a way, making the data explorable becomes important, because while the data has been grouped into data domains, it can be used once it is understandable and explorable for end users. These are some of the examples of how data domains get created and how the data gets accessed. So you can look at a detailed profile of a data set, which includes key statistical parameters such as the range of values, minimum and maximum values, most frequently occurring values, number of null counts, an important parameter of quality. And all of that information, which would have ordinarily taken a few SQL queries or a bit of data analysis to be able to figure out, all of these are now presented to the users in an automated way, and they can use that information to make judgment about how to use the data. This profile also captures some of the metadata that is added by users in the form of tags, and we talked about a machine learning driven methodology for propagating these tags to various data assets. These tags add the additional context required for the users to understand and evaluate how to use these data assets. With the data domains, users can also create entities which are business terms of interest to end users, and these entities and their relationships can be visualized using a knowledge graph. So a knowledge graph would typically come up and show how different entities are related to each other. And with a visual representation, it becomes that much more easier for enterprise users to look and understand the data and explore that data as they go along. So drilling down into various data assets, exploring the relationships, and then forming an opinion about how to use those data assets. This is the process that gets accelerated by organizing the data into various data domains, making the data domains data accessible to end users, profiling those data domains, defining terms and entities on top of those data domains that can then be accessed by end users. And finally, I think one of the most important parts about data engineering is the part about bridging the gap between data, analytics, and business teams. A lot of times, these teams need to work together to formulate an end use case, to formulate a data product, and enabling that collaboration through a technology tool becomes important, and which is where the concept of a workspace comes in. A workspace is a workspace is a platform to bring together different users, data sets, bring together users from different skill sets who can come together, collaborate, decide on how the data should get prepared and transformed, and then execute those transformations using a UI-driven approach and create the final outcome or the final data products as are required. So in that sense, with a unified interface available where different users can come together, collaborate, create pipelines, execute those pipelines, and monitor those pipelines, it empowers the end users to be able to turn around data requests for their particular use cases much faster. Often, business users need to rely on data engineering teams for their transformation requests, for their data preparation requests, but with the UI-driven approach, which is intuitively understood, which the end users can work on themselves, it empowers these users to prepare the data for their end use cases. So with these three scenarios, Modak Naboo accelerates the entire process of creation of data platform. We talked about creation of data pipelines, ingestion and transformation pipelines, and how they can be orchestrated at a scale of thousands of data sets, hundreds of sources, and terabytes of data. We talked about organizing that data into various data domains so that these data domain products can then be consumed by end users, can be consumed by machine learning models, and they're available for end users to explore and understand that data. And finally, we talked about how to bridge the gap in collaboration between data, analytics, and business teams using a workspace, which brings together the different users and provides them the capability to use a UI-driven approach to decide the transformations, create those transformations, execute them, and monitor them from the same interface. And with these capabilities, Naboo is able to accelerate the entire process of creation of data platforms. Thank you. I will stop here, and in case there are any questions, happy to take them.
Yeah.
Do you have any specific application? It's very abstract,
So
I'm not sure if you have any specific application of the platform.
So Modak Naboo is a system which is used in production at 3 of our top customers in healthcare and life sciences. Modak Naboo is that integrated data engineering platform that is orchestrating all the activities that are required to transform a raw data into curated data products. And these activities start from, let's say, ingesting data into a data platform in terms of cataloging that data, profiling that data, tagging that data to make it understandable, and then curating that data for final data products. So the platform orchestrates all of these activities. It's an application which is in production at 3 of our top customers. And under the hood, it works with various systems. For the data processing, it uses Spark for data processing. So the solution example that we talked about is a solution that is built on top of Cloudera CDP.
Okay, yes, I said, like, the pipeline you're mentioning is, you can apply that to anything, right? So you can just go to any kind of industry and do the pipeline you just mentioned. But I just wasn't sure how this applies exactly to life sciences, which is what this session was about, right? So I'm not sure if you have any use cases, or you say you have 4 customers, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I will just, we're glad to hear about those in case you have any, you can share any of that.
Yes, and I think some of the approaches, like we talk about the case of a life sciences customer which we are presenting, but some of these challenges are applicable to customers across. The complexity of data, the multiplicity of sources, using internal and external data, this would be applicable to all customers, and that really depends on the scale and complexity of the data landscape. So the solution presented would still be applicable. In the case of life sciences, we have a real example in production of how the platform has been used to orchestrate those activities and accelerate the time to value. So in that sense, the real value for the platform is looking at some of the core data management issues and automating those. And these data management issues could exist across different industry verticals. This is one example of a life sciences. We've looked at examples in healthcare providers, and we found similar issues. And an approach driven by metadata is what can accelerate that entire process.
Yeah, but this is a horizontal platform and horizontal capability. You don't have any industry-specific functionality built into it, right?
Yeah.
I think that's this question. It applies to any industry.
Yes, it's industry agnostic. In that sense, it's compatible for various use cases across industries. We have, in the course of creation of some of these data products which are industry specific, we've seen those capabilities come in handy in healthcare and life sciences. But fundamentally, the technology platform is equally applicable across different industries.
Okay. Any other questions, the audience?
Thank you so much for joining us today, gentlemen. I have a question. What do you find were some of the greatest challenges in creating, testing, and releasing this platform? And with those challenges, how were you able to overcome them?
That's a great question. I think any platform of this scale requires an extensive development process, requires an extensive testing process. And what we've seen is the best way, or the approach that has best worked for us, is an agile approach where we are quickly iterating on these features as we go along with some of our end users. So working closely with users to look at initial proof of value, initial proof of concept, and then building out detailed capabilities as the use cases arise is what has worked for us. Fundamentally, from a product development standpoint, what we see is that the product or the technology can meet about 70% of the requirements out of the box, but 30% would always be a matter of customization and something that needs to be executed for each engagement separately. So we aim to meet some of those requirements to the extent of 70% for various data management tasks, and the rest 30% is something that gets covered by using bespoke services. So from a standpoint of product development, working closely with customers, understanding those requirements, abstracting it out to a level that it can be applied across, and then quickly iterating and having an agile release process, that is what has worked for us in terms of building out this platform.